Well, joining me now to go through the papers is Sophia Worringer, who is a researcher and political commentator with Young Voices UK. Sophia, morning.
Hi, Rosie. Thanks for having me.
Shall we start with the front page of the Times? And real criticism, which is going to be a challenge for Sir Keir Starmer, that, two of Labour's biggest union backers are saying these green energy plans, they just don't add up for us.
This is really interesting because they've used very deliberate language here. I think the General Secretary of Unite, Sharon Graham, said there should be no repeat of the closure of the coal mines, saying that they should be aware of the jobs that may be lost if the licences for gas and oil aren't renewed. And I think they're deliberately trying to bring up an idea of what Thatcher did with the coal mines to send a clear message to Keir Starmer saying, do not position yourself too far to the right or in the centre, because that is not what the unions stand for, and you won't get the unions backing if you do that. And it's important also to remember that they've each donated 1.2 million to the Labour Party in the last year. So they're very important for Starmer, and they're sending a clear message that says, don't be too far to the right.
How does he navigate that?
Well, I think obviously they're important to the Labour Party politics internally. But I do agree actually with the unions that the licences should be renewed beyond 2050. I think the thing is here is not obviously about the jobs. That is very important. The unions, that's the forefront of their mind, that the jobs should be protected. But I think in an age where energy crisis and energy prices is soaring, it would be stupid, and I think Putin would be laughing at us, to be cutting off energy supplies when we need to be using every means possible to increase our energy security using any way that we can. We know that the renewables are not there yet. We don't have the energy security from the renewables. So to be making promises about future energy security now and be saying that we won't be renewing them, I think is too short-sighted and is silly. We need every energy source that we can get so we can be independent from other international sources of energy supply.
Well, what will be interesting is later on this month, Keir Starmer's going to sort of set out his green missions, and it will be interesting to see if any sort of union pressure shapes some of those policies between now and when we hear that speech. Let's move to the Daily Telegraph, and there's this research that they're citing here, and their conclusion is that draconian measures were a policy failure that saved as few as 1,700 lives in England and Wales. What are they basing this on to have come to that conclusion?
So this is a study from Johns Hopkins University and Lund University, a joint study seeing the gap between countries that did different lockdown measures and how that impacted the death toll at the time. So they compare countries like the UK with Sweden, which had less draconian
Sophia, what
measures.
I'm going to do, just hold right there. We've got some funny interference on your line. So we're just going to call you back and try and improve the line, and we'll come back to that story very briefly, because I do appreciate, I know it's really frustrating when you can hear that, but we'll try and sort it. In the meantime, I'll just tell you a little bit more on that particular story. And the findings suggest, of course, we're reading the Daily Telegraph, we know their perspective on the lockdowns in general, but they're suggesting that the lockdowns in response to the first wave of the pandemic, when compared with sort of less strict policies that were adapted by, things like Sweden, just weren't as successful in conducting their main mission, which was, of course, protecting lives or saving lives, as we know from Boris Johnson on his podium, was stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. I think we've got Sophia back with us. Sophia, are you there?
I am, yes. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's much better. Thank you for bearing with us. So, the conclusion that's being made here is that lockdown was just utterly detrimental.
Yes, and I think what's sad is that none of this challenge was coming during the time of lockdown. I appreciate right at the beginning, it was very difficult for people to know what this COVID disease was and what the impact would be. But once it became clear how it spread and who was affected, unfortunately, a lot of the media questioning around it was all about, why did you not lock down earlier? Why have you not put in more measures? And there wasn't this question of balance and questions about the social impact, the economic impact, and the impact it would have on people's lives and well-being as well, beyond the health impact. And I think that was a shame that it didn't happen at the time, but obviously good that it's coming out now. Not saying it was wrong to lock down, but that question of balance is really important.
And as we know, we've just been discussing this, the COVID inquiry will examine the government's decision making during the pandemic. We know that sort of inquiries face criticism at sort of the length of it, the speed it's taken to get started. We look at countries like Sweden who've already completed their pandemic inquiry already. The pandemic makes the front page of The Guardian as well, and it says Tory austerity left Britain hugely unprepared. Now, this is the voice of the unions. What argument are they making?
So they're saying that the cuts to public services and public spending that were brought about under the Cameron era were detrimental and left the public service workforce unable to deal with the challenges of COVID. And while I agree that there is some merit to this story, I think what's also important to remember is that we would not have been able to borrow the amount that we were able to with the low rates if the public finances had not been in the shape that they were going into COVID. And that was largely due to the efforts of the Cameron government to bring spending in line and to bring down the budget. So I think it's important to remember that we had that headroom to do this extraordinary borrowing for day-to-day spending in the emergency of COVID, which was correct and right to do to protect people's jobs and protect people's livelihoods. But that wouldn't have been possible if the House hadn't been in order. So yes, there may have been other cuts, but we would not have been able to do what we wanted to do otherwise. So that also needs to be remembered.
In about 15 minutes, we're going to be looking at why it is that the rise in the number of young people who are out of work because of ill health has doubled. But what we're seeing on the front page of The Eye is this research saying Generation AI, they're being called, are most fearful of losing their jobs to robots. It's 52% of young adults aged 18 to 24 are concerned that artificial intelligence systems will damage their employment prospects. Is it something that, young people that you know of, that you speak to, friends, colleagues, are deeply concerned about?
I think it is an issue that people are concerned about. And I wonder if the young people in the age bracket here is 18 to 24 are most worried because they most understand the capabilities of AI. Maybe they're ones who've kind of delved into it and understand what it could do to jobs. But I think also their jobs, the kind of entry-level jobs that they may be doing, are most likely to be automated as well. Whereas older people who have more experience and wisdom, they think that is a unique trait that a machine couldn't replace. So maybe they feel slightly more secure. But I think it's also important that in every revolution, and I do think AI is going to be a revolution, there are jobs lost, yes, and that's sad, but that is part of kind of development. But there are also lots of jobs created, and we don't yet know the full extent of those jobs AI will create. But I'm sure and confident that there will be many.
We'll be finding out more about what's happening with the young people who aren't sort of turning up, and either in education or employment, in about 10 minutes' time. If you get a flight, Sophia, travel's supposed to be something that we're still sort of looking forward to and excited for, even though the rising cost of living makes things like that slightly more tricky. But I wouldn't expect to see someone vaping on a plane. And I'm looking inside the Times here, and a major headache for cabin crew has been, we're not smoking anymore. And there's been, countless stories in the past of people getting drunk on planes, but vaping is now causing a problem. It seems very surprising to me that we know we can't smoke when you're in the air. So why would you vape instead?
Well, this is an example of why I think people don't actually make the connection between vaping and smoking. They don't see vaping as smoking. They see it as something separate. But it's important to remember here that vaping is still highly addictive. It's still letting off substances. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the plain smoke detectors can't detect the kind of vape that is being released by these vapes. So it means people can get away with it. But actually, the harms of vaping are being established. And I know the Prime Minister is keen to crack down on vapes being sold to young people because he recognises those harms. So I think it's important that we see vaping as smoking, and in the plane, safety is key. If the aircraft crew tell you to do something, you absolutely need to do it because your life is in their hands. Everyone's life is in their hands. It's absolutely important that the staff have the ability to crack down on vaping just as they would do on smoking.
There's been this sort of problem for vaping where it's a brilliant alternative to smoking if you already were a smoker to help you stop. But what's happening is, we talked about it last week at quite some length, the number of young people who are taking up the habit has been quite alarming for, the government, as you said, Rishi Sunak's quite keen to crack down on it. Sophia, how often do you go into the office in person to do your work?
Most of the day, every day, 4 days a week, usually.
Okay, and if you see a colleague with headphones on, do you think they're trying to kind of knuckle down and get on with the job? Or do you think that's a little bit rude?
I mainly think they're trying to get on with the job. I think if they do it all day, every day, and never come out to kind of speak in between, I do think that is a bit of a shame, because you go into the office for the collaborative work and those small conversations on the side, or you overhear a side conversation that you then need to be brought into, which you obviously miss out on if you're wearing headphones. But I think in small bursts, you're listening to something, maybe you're watching a video or you're listening back to an audio of a meeting. There's ways that you could do it. Not everyone has the luxury of being able to go into a side room, but I think if you are that person who's always wearing headphones, I think it's warranted that there may be a few eyebrows raised.
Yeah, we have so many different sort of post-pandemic working habits, don't we? It is a bit miserable to go into the office and find hardly anyone's there, and anyone there does have headphones on. It sort of defeats the purpose of being there.
Exactly. You go in to have those conversations, and if people aren't willing to, then what's the point? You might as well work from home and save yourself the commute. I think it's so important, this collaborative element of being in the office, particularly for younger employees who can learn from older employees. And I think where possible, people need to be there and talking and having those ideas, which often is your best ideas.
Yeah. Well, the Brets say it should be avoided, which is the story inside the Mail this morning. Sophia, thank you so much for your time going through the front pages mainly, and some of the stories inside the papers that are making headlines this morning. Sophia is a researcher and political commentator with Young Voices UK. There's one